everyone. Welcome to the workshop on what I've called managing chaos, how to effectively run FLL challenge teams. So we'll be discussing, if you're doing FLL, you know it's pretty hectic. We'll be discussing kind of what that's like, how to run the teams without burnout, and to make sure your kids still have a good time. So today's agenda. Uh, Brief intro, I'll go over my background in FLL a little bit more in depth and more focus on the why I'm doing this presentation, as well as doing a quick problem definition, how it would be everywhere at once, choosing the right structure for you, some tips and tricks, and then we can wrap up, ask some questions, and chat about that. So, again, as Amiko mentioned, my name is Taegen. I'm from FRC Team 4476, but I also mentored last fall 4 FLL challenge teams. 105, 37, 641, 45, 981, and 45, 982. This year, just doing 105, just based on COVID things, which we will also talk about a little bit more. So I have been the lead first LEGO League mentor for Waffles since 2019, so for the last Into Orbit season. And this year, as well, keeping on with that role and peppering in a little bit of FLL Explore as well. I also, as a student on my FRC team, I was a mentor for our FLL challenge teams back in 2014 as well. But my main experiences come from these last 2 years. So why this presentation and what does managing chaos entail? So when I first volunteered to be the first LEGO League mentor for the Waffles, I thought it would be, just 1 or 2 teams, no big deal. And it came out to be a very chaotic experience. So a lot of this is going to be firsthand knowledge from being completely overwhelmed last year with the 4 teams that I did run. It was basically chaos, which is, it has its perks, obviously, but definitely some things that you can learn from it after you've been through it 1 year. So that's what does managing chaos entail? The FLL challenge experience, you have kids who are 14 or 9 to 14 years old. So it's like that perfect age range of like independent kids who want to do their own thing, but also still needing a little bit of coaxing. And the maturity of a 9-year-old versus 14 is also very different. So that is a different experience in itself. Managing other mentors as well, if you're the lead mentor or if you're a co-mentor, along with other coaches, maybe some students on an FRC team looking to mentor some FLL kids. That's another experience. And maybe you're managing multiple teams of kids age 9 to 14, in which case you've got what I call a family of teams. And that's a different type of experience as well, because you're less connected with that one team. You're more invested in a bunch of different small groups, which is just different than being a one-on-one mentor. Managing chaos. There's also the part you have to manage the 3 main components of the first LEGO League Challenge program. So there's the innovation project, there's the robot itself, and then there's also teaching the core values. Obviously, this year with judging, they're all in one session, but it's still something where you have to kind of teach each of those components a little bit differently. And then, of course, like we've all gotten used to since March, getting used to things in a COVID-19 world and what that means. So, as an engineer, I'm inclined to take a first look at it and define the situation with a full problem analysis, problem definition perspective. So trying to look at it analytically. The name of the game is figuring out how to prepare properly for what you're planning on doing. So this way you're not having to do it on the fly, which is part of where the chaos comes into play. So as a mentor, it's easy to get super wrapped up in your teams. And if you're getting started now, it's not too late. If you've already had meetings, not too late to take a step back and look at everything from an analytical perspective. So the first thing you want to do is define our vision. What is the goal for the team that you're mentoring or the teams that you're mentoring? Are they provincial contenders, or is it a bunch of new students who are just trying to learn the program and get used to things? Other things, if you've had experience in the past, if you've done past seasons, you can look at issues that you might have with your team structure, things that didn't go so well last year or that aren't going so well right now, the problems that we need to fix urgently, and anticipated problems. What could come about in the future that we maybe are not necessarily prepared for yet? Because being prepared helps out a lot in kind of anticipating what comes next, because if you have thought of all the possible problems, then when they do come up, you'll have a solution. And obviously not all the problems you can define will come up, but it's better to be prepared than not. You can also analyze your finances. As a coach, it's something that we're probably hyper aware of at all times. And just seeing, what resources do we have as well. And those tie in with the actual resources, but also mental, emotional resources. People is a resource that you can never underestimate when running FLL teams. Just, if you need a day off, you need to make sure there'll be someone to fill that place, or you have to prepare in advance. So those are the main things that, as a mentor, you want to take a step back, look at, and you can ask the kids too. You can say, hey, what do you think is the goal for the season? Are you guys expecting to win your champions award at your regional and move on to provincials and qualify for worlds? What do you want to do? Or do you just want to have fun? All of which are totally valid answers. If you have a bunch of new students, they may not necessarily know. So keep that, basically take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, you want to hear from your students. And the biggest thing is they are kids, but they're also going to be a lot better if you treat them like adults. If you treat them like, you would talk to a peer, and give them that level of respect. They really appreciate it, especially because they're trying to grow up. And we get to enable that, which is really awesome. So, keeping in mind your problem definition, which you can sit down and do afterwards, you can do it with your team, you can do it with the parents on your team, all of which, again, totally valid. Keeping in mind, this allows you to decide what you want to do for the season. So if we want to be a super competitive team, we're going to schedule more meetings. If we're going to be a little more relaxed, we're going to take a step back. We might just meet once a week for an hour and a half. Other things that you want to keep in mind when you're deciding your team structure are team size, both your mentor team pool and your student team pool. Something I'm a big advocate for is not running teams at the full 10 student maximum. I'm a fan of 4 to 6. It's a lot more manageable, even if it means you have more teams and over the same student body. I would rather personally run 4 teams of 5 students than 2 teams of 10 students. It's better for the students, and it allows them to actually get more out of the program. It's a little bit more hectic on your end. So it all depends on kind of what you prefer. But team size, it's also easier to manage small groups of kids as opposed to 10 kids, because then it's like a 10-to-1 ratio and you can easily be overpowered by a tiny mob of children. I've learned that one very well. The other one, keeping in mind, is based on your experience level. So last year, for example, when I went into this, I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. I didn't know the programming language. I didn't really understand the innovation project. I kind of knew what the core values were. So your experience level will also drive what you're doing. If you've been doing this and you're a pro, massive props to you. And with that, you can also kind of guide your team in that aspect because you don't have to learn with them. And obviously learning with your team, it can be fun. It can be like we're all getting something out of it. And that's also totally okay. It just depends on the background level. If you've been doing this for 6 years, you probably don't need me to tell you how to open the EPP software. But, if it's your first year, maybe the kids are really figuring it out. You have to keep in mind your experience level when you're choosing how to run your cohort or your single team. The other one is materials sharing. So especially in COVID-19, when you're figuring out your team structures, you want to see how much are we going to share. And kids, especially with Lego, sometimes get really into it and they really don't want to share, which is understandable. I remember being a kid. I didn't want to share with my sisters. Can't blame her. But, now it's thinking, okay, as a coach, how am I going to organize how materials are going to be shared? Thinking that in advance. If you're fortunate enough to have a budget where every kid in COVID-19 can have their own field set, that's great. If not, you're going to have to figure out a schedule to rotate that around, because it's really crucial that everyone gets the same amount of time with the robot, the same amount of time on the project. Student maturity is the last thing that you really need to keep in mind when you're setting out your problem definition, choosing your goals for the season. A team of 5th graders, 6th graders versus a team of 7th and 8th graders are going to be a lot different in dynamic. The students are going to be a lot less dependent when they're older on you as a mentor, which means that you can allow them a little bit more freedom, and it's easier to manage more of them compared to this 4th, 5th, 6th graders who might need a lot of that one-on-one focus. So when you're thinking about your team structure, you need to think about who you're catering to. If it's a mix of both, then you kind of go with a hybrid, like young dependent versus older independent model. Another thing that I want to touch up on as well, for student maturity as part of a team structure, and this is more just a note as an aside, if you do have a bunch of mature students, something that takes the burden off of you as a mentor and is really awesome, because then you have to plan a little bit less and save your time, focus elsewhere, is having a weekly rotating student leader. So that's just a tip that I found I found online when I was doing my first season, and I found for some of my teams they could manage it where they would have the person going over what we did last week and filling the other students in, focusing on the homework that they did. That takes the burden off of you as a mentor and allows multiple teams to run consecutively instead of, even whether it's a bunch of kids in a Zoom call with you or a bunch of kids sitting in front of you and you just talking. My ideal FLL team, which involves a little bit more teamwork and working alongside one another, involves less of the mentor talking and more of the kids doing, even if it takes a little bit longer for them to learn things that way. So going off of that note, if we are going to have it so that the kids are teaching themselves and working alongside one another, the art of being everywhere at once. So especially if you're running a bunch of different teams or if you're running your own team that you've broken up into subgroups, obviously the more bodies that you have as mentors, the better. But if it's just you, the biggest thing is using the resources available to you to do this. So when it comes to having mentors, obviously more mentors is better. But if it's just you as the main mentor, you can use breakout rooms and groups to really help kind of spread out the workload, because then each one will kind of pop up with their problems and their questions at the same time. The other thing that I loved having when I ran my 4 teams last year was using parents. So parents would be kind of running alongside, helping out their kids. They almost got invested as like mini mentors. If you have other adults that can do that, that also works perfectly. But as a community-based team, we basically said, hey, if you're doing this, parents are signing up to be involved as well. If you have other adults, if you're a teacher, maybe other teachers are interested in just dropping in to help supervise the kids too and keep them on task. And that way it kind of helps, if you can't notice that some kids are kind of going off and maybe they're having a conversation about whatever the kids do these days. Apparently my children like to watch Naruto. Well, not my children, but like my teen children. They like watching Naruto, so they'll talk about that, and then it requires, rating them in. Do I know what Naruto is? No. The other thing is if there are FLL alumni, if you're a teacher and you've had some students go through your program and they're either still nearby, or if you've got an FRC team that helps run your FLL teams, use those older students too. They have that extra maturity that comes with, having gone through first for a few years. And it also gives you some more bodies that they can also go to for questions, which is really helpful. And even if they don't know, they can help figure out those kids, or help figure it out alongside those kids. They have that extra brain power. The other thing that is key, and if you're a teacher, you've probably figured this one out by now, but for the Queen's students and the university students like me without the teaching background, something that I learned very quickly was keeping an eye on your students' body language. Whether it's the noise volume or if you're seeing them on a call, particularly like start to fidget or look away from the camera, those are big things, and that tells you where you really need to redirect your focus. So if you're only one person, it's hard if you're checking in because the kids might not necessarily feel like you're spending a lot of time with them, but that way you can kind of just check in with them every so often, let them know you're still there as a resource. The other thing, if you are able to meet in person and your kids are working in their little subgroups or they're working with their teams, is using the whiteboard system. The whiteboard system, essentially, I just have them write their name down if they have a question, and then that way I know where to go next if I'm not able to necessarily stop and read the room if it's a really hectic meeting, for example. So the tough decision, and this is one of my favorite pictures from our FLL regional last year, it was Alexander having a rough session. It's the hard part is choosing the model that fits for you, but luckily it doesn't have to be as daunting as it seems. So essentially, there's 2 main models. I call them the all-for-one model, which is your one-to-one mentor-to-team ratio, where it's your one mentor, you're sticking with the team throughout the whole season, or what I called last year the multi-team madness, because it was absolutely insane. But it was also very rewarding at the end of it too. So the all-for-one model is essentially, if you don't have a lot of resources, this might be the best one for you. It's easier to manage. There's less kids reached, which is a downside, but you also spend more time with them. It also allows you to make sure and check in with them. It can also really help if your kids are on that lower scale of the maturity or younger ages. They might need that direct supervision. And if you don't have parents, for example, who are able to keep an eye on them, make sure they're focusing on what they're doing, or other teachers to help you, that can be a model that you might want to consider. If you've got a lot of students who are interested, though, I am all for getting as many kids as you can involved in FLL. And while it may, the name might put a negative connotation on it, running multiple teams is a lot more work in time that you have to invest into it. But you do reach more students, and it is easy to manage once you kind of get into the swing of things and figure out how to prepare. That is really the name of the game. The other thing that I want to mention, choosing what works for you, especially this year, is a school board team versus a community team. The benefits to this one, obviously, being that you're not subject to school board restrictions that come with COVID-19. However, that is something that a lot of teams like having. They love having that school board support. It's mostly for those areas that maybe extracurriculars or co-curriculars have been canceled. You might want to look at evolving your system from a school to a community model for this year, in which case the things that you will encounter from experience are you'll have more flexibility with when you set your meetings. For example, our teams meet in the evenings after dinner. That allows them to go to a school sport afterwards if they want to do it. They can do more things, but it also is a little bit harder to reach new students after each year and recruit. So you kind of have to maintain that balance, pick and choose what's feasible for you and with the kids that you're reaching. The other downside is that you don't have a school board support. So if you're getting support from them financially to buy things like your EV3 kits, your spike kits, your field tables, instead you have to look out and find sponsorship for that or charge a registration fee. Obviously, if we could get everything covered, that would be the ideal situation if it just never had a cost. But unfortunately, you do still have to consider those things when you're choosing a school or community. And if you're starting a team for the first time ever and you're thinking maybe I'll get connected with my school board, maybe I'll get connected with my community, both have amazing upsides and their own downsides. So I just encourage you to think based on my resources, based on my experience level, what am I going to do? And then you can go back to your problem definition, figure it out from there. That's kind of what you always want to circle back to. So the part that you all came here for is the tips and tricks for an efficient team. So a few things that I learned as my time running a cohort of teams that really helped as we got over the season. So one thing that I found was very helpful, particularly with the noise level or them getting, chatty or getting off topic, is a code that your students understand, where it's like you can say, hey, you need to get back on track without just saying, hey, you need to get back on track. If you are in person, you can do that where sometimes you would just, or something I would do is I just raise my hands up and I'd wait until everyone else had raised their hands up. And if they knew that, then the whole room would fall quiet and then we go from there. Other ones you can do like, if you can hear me, put your finger on your nose, especially if it's online, because then you're seeing that they're actually listening to you and not just passively listening. Other things, some kids have jokes that they find very funny. The art of TikTok has made a lot of phrases that these kids know that I don't really understand, but one that one of my students mentioned to me was, if you say chicken wing, they'll respond hot dog and bologna. I don't know, but it's, if they understand, if they have something that they know is something they need to rein themselves in, then that's kind of what helps run them and their focus level a little bit better. The other one is the value of homework. And while I don't mean homework in the sense of go home, finish your problem set, come back, something like it could be, hey, go watch this video about how to program. This is my little plug for the Waffles EV3 programming tutorials. We have a bunch of them on YouTube, but that's something we've been using as value of homework for getting them caught up to speed, especially if you have new students. There can be a lot for them to learn. So whether that be doing some research on their innovation project, watching some programming tutorials, that saves everyone time because then you don't have to go out over it in your session. And then on your session, you can focus on using the time you have together as a team to get stuff done. It also works even if kids don't get it done fully. It's always a really good discussion starter. So then you're not kind of walking in and going, okay, what now? Even if they haven't done it, normally one kid will at least have done something, and then from there you can kind of cycle through it. So this year, for example, being about health and fitness, we said, okay, look the comic that they post every year. What are some questions that you think of when you see this? And then from there, we were able to spiral that into a conversation about the question asked in the innovation project. Even if they haven't done a ton of research, you as mentors can then help guide that discussion afterwards. The other thing is a scheduled timetable. Obviously, you're not necessarily always going to be able to stick to it. Maybe sometimes things will take longer than you anticipate. But the main thing is you want to have scheduling and structure. You don't want to do the same things at the same time every day. So if I say I've got this meeting here, I want to start at 5 p.m. It's going to go till 6:30. You can break it up into chunks and let them know what those chunks are time-wise beforehand. But you don't want it to always be, okay, from 5:30 to 5:45 we go over homework. From 5:45 to 5:50 then we talk about core values. Then we take a break. You don't want it to be the same content in that structure. But you do want to structure out every meeting beforehand. And as a mentor, you have to have a time assigned to that. And then if you've got other co-mentors, they can help enforce it if they see kids are kind of falling behind or moving forward. And you can always adjust it if you need to. Nothing is set in stone. The other one is plan breaks. So especially this year where kids are stuck either at home, they're not getting to socialize with their friends a lot. And even you as a mentor sitting in a chair and looking at a screen or standing in front of everyone needs a mental break, and you need to incorporate those into all of your meetings, whether that's, them bringing a snack and everyone eating their snack at the same time and just kind of relaxing, playing a game. There's some really great games online that are free, like scribble.io is one where you draw things, you have to guess what the name of the thing that your friend is drawing is. Something that completely redirects your mind away from first Lego League. Not like an icebreaker that you would do for core values, just something that really promotes getting to know each other. Even if they already know each other, kids like playing games. And as a mentor, that allows you to kind of just zone out for a little bit, think about what's coming next, think about what's happened. If you're taking notes of what's happening during the meeting, take your notes and get up and stretch. That's another big break that I'm a fan of, is like stretching, standing up, because it also gets them to shake out the jitters, which I find I get too. I get restless sitting in a chair for, an hour and a half at a time. The other thing that an efficient team needs to do is emphasize inclusion, and this really comes into play with core values activities. Core values activities, obviously, if you've done FLL before, you're focusing on the diversity, inclusion, impact, innovation, fun, teamwork, and I think I said 6, my bad. But if you're going through that, you want to focus on using those core value activities to make sure everyone's getting a say. Another thing is I want to emphasize that everyone should get to do the same amount of work when you come out of an FLL team or FLL challenge team this year. You really want to make sure everyone's had a chance to do everything, learn what they want to learn, but also learn things they maybe didn't come here to do. I don't know how many times a kid has said, "Oh, I want to program the robot," and then you see them running their innovation project skit, and you're like, "Okay, well, you're clearly enjoying that as well." They may not think it's what they enjoy doing, but once they get into it, often it's once you're into it, you're into it. And with that being said, that moves me right into the first thing that if you're trying to run an efficient team, you need to stop doing, and that's having permanent sub-teams. So I am very much an advocate of, if you're going to do groups, if I'm going to break out my 4 or 6 or 8 or 5 kids, however many I have, ideally you run one that's got multiple, like a multiple of 2. You want an even number so you can have even splits, but if not, that's fine. And then you don't want to have the same sub teams every time. You want to be able to rotate through, because otherwise you get into this kind of like divided mentality. This divided mentality in your team, which doesn't help promote the teamwork and the working together and the getting to know each other. And then that way you're also not necessarily including everyone. For example, if it's like, okay, the girls are going to work on the programming, the boys are going to work on the innovation project, that is a big no-go zone. I am not going to promote that one here in this conference, at least. It's just something where unnecessary separation. And if you're going to separate them, which is a resource that you can use, you need to make sure you're doing it so that everyone feels involved and everyone gets to work with everyone else. So permanent sub-teams is a no. Another one is mentors touching the robot. And I know sometimes it's really tempting, because we see these things where it's like, if you fix that one thing right there, let me do that, and then I'll fix it right away. It actually causes harm in the long run. The kids aren't getting to do the work, and it inhibits their learning. So if you are going to do something where it's like, I'm going to teach you how to build this type of Lego attachment, you can build it and show it to them, but you need to disassemble it right afterwards so they can't just use it. So that way that they're working and learning it on their own. So that way, later down the road, they know what they're doing and they know how to fix it. always feel free to provide help. But the main thing is, if you do anything permanent, or if you do anything on the robot, it can't be permanent. You need to delete the code. You need to unassemble whatever you've assembled. It saves time, and it makes sure the kids get to do what the kids want to do, which is the most important thing. So I am honestly a very much, I don't even want to touch the robot. It's not something that I think as mentors we need to be doing, and I think it saves efficiency on top of everything else, which is another bonus. Another thing is, if you do have multiple teams, you want to avoid sharing materials between teams as much as possible. That causes a little bit of drama. It means that each team might start working off of each other, and you maybe want to do core values activities together. If you've got multiple teams, that's totally fine. But things like if they're doing different research projects, you want to make sure they're as separate as possible. If you are able to have separate team or tables for each team, that's amazing. But at the very least, you want to make sure, like, if you've got one table for 2 or 3 teams, this team is going to work at this time, and you want the other team to be removed from it. You don't want them necessarily seeing each other's progress, because then they're, again, getting less out of it. You get the risk of people saying, hey, they touched my robot, and then it didn't work the same after I ran it, even though we know that FLL robots don't run the same no matter what you do to them. Every run will be different no matter what. They'll say, you might get some drama, basically, and I am a very anti-drama individual on my FLL teams. That's not necessarily something you need for a healthy team culture. Same goes for research. If you can guide your teams onto different innovation projects, please do so. It definitely helps out. And while you can share resources, when you say, hey guys, this is how research works, look at Encyclopedia Britannica, you don't want to say, okay, both of you would really benefit from looking at this one article. Then they're just not getting the skills out of it, and it causes potential issues down the line, especially at competition, because judges know if teams are connected to one another as well. So you just want to avoid that before you even get started with it. So with that being said, that kind of wraps up the presentation as a whole. So at this point, if any of you guys have any questions, I am more than happy to answer. This is obviously our FRC team, but I thought the photo worked pretty well. Thank you again for listening. It means a lot to have your support. I love getting to share what I do. So thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much, Taegen. That was really fascinating, and also very, I think, inspiring and impressive that you're able to tackle so many teams at once and still clearly are putting so much effort into really giving your time to each team. So at this point, for anyone, if you do have questions, feel free to unmute yourself if you're comfortable doing so. But the chat is also a really great feature, if that works better for you.
I have a quick question. My name is Tess. First of all, thank you very much. That was really, really helpful. How do you motivate kids to do things that they don't want to do? So for example, I had some kids who only want to program, some kids who only want to build, some, etc. So how do you get a builder? How do you encourage them to program or try something else?
Yeah, so obviously it's not always going to be as easy as maybe I'd like it to be. But one thing you can do is try to connect the thing that they don't want to do to the thing that they do enjoy doing. So, for example, if it's a builder and you're trying to get them to program, something that could work is, okay, if you are, build something really small and quickly and then test it out on the thing that you're programming to get you involved in that skill. I find if you can connect the dots that they don't necessarily see the connection between those dots. A big one is especially working on the project versus working on the robot in general. A lot of the time, those two feel like two kind of disconnected things. But turning it into something where, maybe it's the project and you're thinking, all right, well, we don't really want to do research on this year, obviously, healthy living. You can try to relate that back to the mat, especially if there's a mission on the mat that is about what they're trying to do. You can say, all right, well, we built it for this. In real life, how would we do that? And then that kind of gets that part of their brain working. Another part is just keeping it in like short intervals. If you're really noticing, like you're seeing they're not having a good time, pairing them up with people that they maybe get along with works as well. sometimes it'll feel like pulling teeth, to be totally honest. Getting them to do things they don't want to do, especially if they've decided that it's just not happening today. Sometimes, it won't work. But the main thing is, if you can get them with people they enjoy working with, and obviously, ideally, they work with everyone equally. But sometimes, if they know someone from out of school, put them with someone they're comfortable with. And then make sure they see why the thing they're doing relates back to the thing they like doing more. And sometimes they won't tell you too. You'll just notice that they feel kind of like meh about it. If you'd say, okay, go work on the project, just maybe if you notice that, that's when you'd say, okay, now that you worked on the project, let's talk about how this relates back to this, and incorporate that in. And hopefully, eventually, they'll get into the swing of it. Yeah. So, does your team use EV3 Classroom? In the past, we haven't, just because it was my first time doing it and I didn't know really what resources were available. So each team just had a separate laptop and then just shared the laptop around. So that was kind of what we used instead, but I'd be totally open to like looking into it and using it further. But we do use EV3s if that's like, we use that kit still, so we use the resources that are published for that. If that helps answer, and if I didn't cut out this time, hopefully.
Hello, Taegen.
Hello, Stephen.
I have a question.
Okay.
You talked about looking at body language of the students and trying to engage them. And I was wondering if you had any tips on how you might go about engaging kids in the Zoom world that we're in right now, if you see kids starting to lose interest.
Yeah, so a big one with the online learning is that you can't necessarily kind of tell by the way that they're acting full body. You kind of only get that waist up view, which can make it a little bit more difficult. So I find then you kind of have to go into that more like answer or asking questions and calling them out, as much as it might be a little more uncomfortable for them if they're obviously not in it and then they get called on. Another thing is checking to see if they're looking at the camera, if they can turn their webcam on. If they're not turning their webcam on, checking in with them and chat periodically is another one. Or if you've got two mentors and one's talking and the other one's just kind of sitting back, you can have the one sitting back just like send a message in the Zoom chat, be like, hey, does everyone understand this? And you see kind of if the response comes in or not, then you kind of know what's going on. But a general one is like, you can still see to some extent fidgeting, jumping around, not looking at the camera. Obviously, if their webcam is like over here, like as long as they've been looking in the same place the whole time, that's generally a good thing. But with Zoom, you also have to be extra cautious to make sure that you are engaging everyone. So those direct asking might be a little more awkward for the kids, a little less natural, but it's necessary to kind of keep people involved. Hopefully that answers your question.
I had a question for you, Taegen, actually. You talked a bit about sort of leveraging the older students on your team and because they have a bit more responsibility, like giving them a bit more independence. And this is sort of coming from a personal experience. I'm wondering if you've ever had an issue with those older students on the FLL team sort of being maybe more off task more often. I'm not sure if that's something you've experienced or if you have any suggestions for how to deal with that.
Yeah, to some extent, I think when they're a little bit older, maybe it's a little less cool to sit back and listen in and do what you're told. But the main thing is if you're giving, that's why I like giving them those tasks of responsibility, because then that actively engages them a little bit more, because I think they need that. They need to feel that sense of like, okay, today I'm in charge and today I'm going to work on this. It's hard if you've got a balance or a mix of like younger and older students on the same team, because then some kids will be ready for that. Some kids will be a little uncomfortable with it. The other one is pairing up older students with younger students to help them out. It's something where to do that, again, it's like checking in with them, keeping them on task, checking the body language, but giving them maybe tasks that might seem a little bit harder as well, kind of keeping them engaged in that respect. If that kind of helps. It's not a catch-all. Obviously, some kids will be more likely to get off task than others, But once you kind of figure out who needs that attention too, you can direct that and then either direct more mentor resources that way to specifically making sure they stay on task. I've definitely had students where they have been a lot more hands-on required than others. Some of them are able to kind of keep their other kids in rein, and that's when it's hard because you can't be everywhere at once, really. But if you know who those people are, you can check in with them more often.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And at this point, if we can catch any last minute questions, and if not, we've sort of come to the end of our session right now. So if anyone has any last minute questions, put them in the chat, and I'll freeze this sort of wrap up.
Yeah, and also if you think of any questions later, feel free to shoot me a message. LinkedIn, the email that's on the screen below, social media, all of that. I'm pretty easy to reach. I'm a student, right? I'm in university. I'm connected to my phone all the time. So if you guys ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, because I know sometimes you think of something like 20 minutes later after the session's over. So no stress. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it a lot.
And thanks so much for being here again, Taegen. It's so helpful to hear from the experiences of people like you. And I think I probably speak for everyone else here when I say that was really, really an incredible presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I hope good luck to all of you if you're competing this season.